Hi, everyone. This is Ashley Latecki Ellenboss with Sky House Herb School and Apothecary. And today I'll be talking about some of the most effective herbs that I use in my clinical practice for relieving the symptoms associated with menopause. And some of these symptoms include hot flashes and night sweats, dryness, insomnia, and mood dysregulation. But before I dive into that, I want to say that as a clinical herbalist, really what I'm trained to do and what I'm best at is looking at individuals and custom compounding or custom formulating blends for them. So taking into account the whole person, all of the other symptoms, and then choosing herbs. So what I'll be sharing with you today are some of my top herbs that I pretty much put in most people's formulas. But just know that usually I'm using other herbs as buffers around these herbs to either potentiate or to modify and modulate some of their activities. So let's first start talking about what are the major classes of herbs that work really well overall for menopausal symptoms. So the first group that I recommend are adaptogens, because part of what happens with menopause is that as your ovary reserve begins to go down and your estrogen levels begin to go down, what picks up the place of estrogen production are your adrenal glands and your fat cells. And so, what happens with a lot of women who are going through menopause and who have a lot of symptoms, because some women don't have symptoms, very many symptoms. But for most of the clients I have who have, really difficult symptoms and they find them very challenging, it can often be because they've been under high amounts of stress for a long period of time. And so their adrenals, which regulate the production of cortisol and other stress based hormones, those adrenals are exhausted. And so when it comes time in menopause for those same glands to produce estrogen, they're just wiped out. They're like, okay, I'm tapping out here. I'm done. I can't do it. And so those symptoms of estrogen withdrawal or estrogen deficiency really show up quite in a quite pronounced way. So if we support the adrenals and we balance that hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis or the HPA axis, this for many women will help reduce the severity of symptoms because estrogen levels will naturally be able to increase and cortisol and stress response, which can trigger things like hot flashes and night sweats. Those triggers will go down. So adaptogens are the first class of herbs. The second class are nervines and specifically relaxing nervines. And even more specifically, bitter relaxing nervines. And these are really helpful because, again, as I mentioned, during menopause, one of the things that can really trigger hot flashes for women is stress. They'll think a stressful thought and a flush will come, or they'll start getting involved in an intense conversation, and that will bring on a hot flash. So, if you can regulate your nervous system either by using adaptogens, I will say this though, adaptogens take usually a long time to notice an effect. So think about an adaptogen is like putting money in the savings account. It's going to build you up over time. But a nervine is like, it's like instant withdrawal, like it's cash that you have right there in the moment. And in this case, it's cash you have to relax the nervous system so that your stress response is much more dampened. So bitter ones are especially helpful because the bitter taste is cooling in most cases, predominantly cooling. And so, we're also balancing that energetic switch and flush that happens with the hot flashes. And then the third class of herbs that can be used are phytoestrogen containing herbs. So these are herbs that contain weak estrogens or phytoestrogens. They are not the same chemically as the estrogens that are endogenous and produced in your body. But the cool thing is that they have a very similar type of shape. So if you think about this is your estrogen receptor, a pure estrogen that your body makes will fit it like completely and it'll have a direct fit. But a weak estrogen will come in and it will just sort of have a little bit of a match. It won't be a complete junction, but it'll plug it just enough for this receptor to then carry out that estrogenic effect throughout the rest of your body. So it will create, if you have enough of that in your blood and you have enough of those estrogen receptors being lightly triggered, you will have an overall estrogenic response. And this is something that we've seen in science. It is a known entity. So there are a number of herbs that have those abilities. Okay, so now let's talk first about hot flashes or hot flushes, they might be called. So the herbs that I recommend for these, my top three are blue vervain, black cohosh, and hops. Let's talk about each one and some of their differences. So the first one is blue vervain. Blue vervain, the Latin name is Verbena hastata. This plant is bitter. It's a nervine relaxant, so it fills that function that we talked about earlier. Um, it also is a really good relaxant. It's really good for neck tension, jaw tension, for headaches, um, and it's cooling. And it has this. While it's not phytoestrogenic per se, it does seem to have an estrogen modulating activity. We're not sure about the mechanism, but it does seem to modulate estrogen, which is a great thing. So this herb is a wonderful one, and I pretty much put it in every single formula, especially if they're having a lot of hot flashes and night sweats, like waking up in the night and just, drenching the sheets. This would be one herb I would strongly recommend. 1 to 2 milliliters of a tincture 3 times a day. If you're having really severe night sweats, you could use 2 milliliters before bed. And you might want to combine this. I would recommend combining this with maybe some of the other herbs in this talk. The second herb is black cohosh, and black cohosh is a phytoestrogenic plant. So this one is very specific in that it does increase estrogen levels in the body by this weak activity in the receptors. And black cohosh, it was traditionally used for the moody, broody, sort of dark energy type of person, kind of like the old dark crone who lives in a cave and is maybe a little snippy. It was also used traditionally for lower back pain and back spasms. And so I find it to be especially useful for women that are going through menopause, that are kind of in a dark place about it. Maybe they're not very accepting or excited about it. Maybe there's some underlying rage that has been sort of bubbling under the surface. And as a clinician, I can hear that in people's voices or just kind of feel it. So if I can get a sense that that might be what's going on, that there's some underlying tension, anger, rage, that's part of this pattern, then I'll recommend black cohosh. And this is something that can be used as a tincture. Some people like it as a pill. The recommended dose is 500 milligrams to about 1 gram, and that can be dosed twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. So if it's a tincture, I would do 0.5 milliliter, or 1 milliliter twice a day. And that's a little bit higher than a milligram, but it ends up being about even. And then the other herb that is sort of a sister component to black cohosh is Pulsatilla. So this is something that Kat Mayer recommended and spoke about. She's an herbalist from the Sacred Tradition School in Charlottesville, Virginia. And she says, if black cohosh is more for the dark, moody, broody type, Pulsatilla is sort of more for the light, fair, weepy type. So if a woman's going through menopause and she's a little bit more just sort of prone to emotional outbursts of tears and nostalgia and joy and sadness, and just sort of like having all of these big, but they're a little bit kind of on the spectrum, they're lighter kind of, if that makes sense, side of the spectrum, then Pulsatilla would be a good match there. Now, Pulsatilla is a very low dose herb. So it's one that I only use as a single herb in drop doses. So if you wanted to use this, you can find a tincture. They're a little hard to find if you're not a practitioner, but just one, even tops 2 drops 2 to 3 times a day, is sufficient. And I would just start with 1 drop 3 times a day and just see how you do with that. You can also use it homeopathically, which I've recommended for people. So you can use 5 pellets of a 6C strength and dose that 3 times a day. And Pulsatilla really just helps to balance the mood and energy and just sort of extreme kind of windiness. It's another name for Pulsatilla is windflower. So this windiness that can just feel like you're out of your mind and you're ungrounded. Pulsatilla can really help with that. And then hops. Hops is a great one. This is the same plant that's found in beer. So if you like a hoppy IPA, then you will probably like the taste of hops. Now, hops is also phytoestrogenic, and this is one of the reasons why it's a little dangerous for men to drink a lot of hoppy beer because they might start growing breasts. They might start to actually show signs of excess estrogen, which is not great. But for women that are going through menopause, not a bad thing. I don't think alcohol is a great thing for women that are menopausal, especially with hot flashes, only because it tends to trigger them. The main triggers for hot flashes I've seen in my practice is coffee, especially red wine, but most alcohol, but definitely red wine at the top, and sugar. So, reducing those 3 things can also play a significant role. But if you're gonna have something to drink, having a hoppy beer every once in a while, along with taking hops as a tincture, is something that I would recommend. So, hops is bitter. It's a nervine sedative. It's especially good for sleep. So, taking maybe, if you can bear the taste, it's a strong bitter flavor, but, if you can take a full squirt of tincture into your mouth and just let your mouth feel all of the feels that it gets from getting activated, or you could add a little bit of it to some warm water and then take that before bed. And if you tend to wake up in the middle of the night, you can also take a squirt of that, and then it will help you relax and be able to fall back asleep to get a full 8 or 8.5 hours of sleep. That is really good for your body when you're going through menopause, is to get plenty of sleep so that your body can repair and process. Because, menopause is also a very powerful time in a woman's life. It's not something that we should be fighting or fearing. And I'm probably, speaking to the choir here, but it's a really powerful time where a woman moves into her power. She moves into her elderhood, where she becomes a sage, and the role of teacher and guide can flow through more fluidly. And so this transition, out of that sort of maiden to mother into the more crone or the elder stage is very, very powerful. So, I recommend, if you want to learn more about that, reading Susan Weed's book. I forget the name of it, but if you look up Susan Weed and menopause, she has a really good book on how to really embody the power of the menopausal years. I think that's what it's called. It's called the menopausal years. So check that out. Yeah, insomnia. I think hops is definitely hands down one of my favorites. Here's also where adaptogens can fit in, because when the sleep cycle is off and a woman is getting further and more further depleted, this is going to trigger more of those symptoms. So using my 2 favorite adaptogens for menopause are shatavari and ashwagandha. So shatavari is, the Latin name is Asparagus racemosus, and it is an Ayurvedic herb. And ashwagandha is also an Ayurvedic herb, and its Latin name is Withania somnifera. And the somnifera, we hear somna, which is sleep. So it's also used for sleep. But these 2 adaptogens, especially when used together, are very balancing for the body's hormones. I think of them sort of as like the king and the queen of adaptogens, and they blend very nicely together and are used in Ayurveda a lot in combination with one another. So the part that's used are the roots, and the recommended dose is 2 to 4 grams. So what I would recommend, if you wanted to try these adaptogens, is to do 2 grams of shatavari and 2 grams of ashwagandha, and you can buy them as a loose powder and then just blend them together. So that ends up being usually about a little bit more than half a teaspoon in the morning, and this is both of them blended, and then the same thing in the evening. So you might want to just blend a large batch together and then just dose yourself every morning and evening. And again, these take longer. So it might take more like a month or two to see the effects, whereas, hops and blue vervain, you're going to see that more quickly. And then the last symptom that shows up a lot is dryness. And this can be dryness in the skin. This can be vaginal dryness. This can be even emotional dryness. And so my favorite hands down recipe is a blend of marshmallow, rose, and cinnamon. And marshmallow is just a wonderful herb for moistening the body. It moistens you from the inside out. So the polysaccharides actually help hold moisture to the mucosal lining of the gut. And so we get this reflexive moistening effect, and it just really plumps everything back up. It's really, really nice. So, and then rose is the second herb. And you can use rose petals. I recommend organic whenever possible because a lot of roses are sprayed. So, organic rose petals, and then cinnamon. And you can just use powdered cinnamon from your spice cabinet. And what you would do to make this is use half a cup of dried marshmallow root, about 2 teaspoons of rose petals, and about half a teaspoon of cinnamon. Put this in a large mason jar, about 1 quart jar, and then pour cool water on top, and then let that steep overnight. And then in the morning, strain it out into a fresh cup or jar, and then drink that throughout the day. Now, these herbs are cooling, minus the cinnamon, which is a little bit warming, but marshmallow and rose are cooling. Um, Rose is a gentle nervine relaxant. Cinnamon is a carminative to help with digestion, and marshmallow is just cool and moist. So it's, that you can think about the rose and cinnamon as sort of like little helpers, but marshmallow is really the largest. That's the most important part of this formula. But it tastes so good. Oh my gosh, it's such a delicious blend. So you can try that as well, just to sort of moisten and open things. Like opening the heart is part of this medicine, as well as moistening the body, both inside and outside. So these are the things that I would recommend that you try. I also see clients. So, if you're feeling like, oh, this sounds good, but I want someone to actually kind of hold my hand, listen to my full story, and formulate for me, that's something that I do. So you can reach me at skyhouseherbs.com, click on services and consultations, and you can take a look at my rates, and schedule an appointment right there. And I work with a custom compounding formulary out in California, when they blend all of the herbs for me. So I'll be able to put all of them together for you in a very specific blend, make the teas for you, and just have them shipped. So all you have to do is just take them. But some of you might want to do this really, I think, fun work of trying some of these herbs on their own or just in simple combinations. So I do encourage you to do that. You don't need to have someone custom formulate for you to be able to access this medicine. So thank you all for listening. Let me know in the comments section how you have found help and support with your menopausal symptoms, or if you haven't, and what you've tried. And yeah, as always, your feedback is appreciated. And if you think this information might be helpful to someone you know, please pass it along. And while you're at it, like this video, and share this work with any other people in your field, because this is something I'm really passionate about, and really the best way this information is shared is by word of mouth. So thank you for that, and thank you for listening. Take care and have a good day.